Okay, so today we are talking about inverse trig functions. So these are when we know a ratio and we want to go backwards and find the angle. It can either, be written as the trig function with a -1 exponent, or it can have the word arc in front of it. Both of these phrases mean the exact same thing, and the higher you go in math, the more likely you are to see the arc terms. So, things you need to know. Inverse sine has a domain of -1 to 1 and a range of -pi-halves to pi-halves. So these are just flipping our domain and range for our normal sine graph. Same thing for cosine. It has a domain of -1 to 1, and this range is from 0 to pi. And then inverse tangent has a domain of -infinity to +infinity, and this range is from -pi-halves to pi-halves. So when we're working with inverse trig, unless the problem tells us otherwise, we will always assume it wants it in radians. So on the first three, it wants me to find the exact value, if possible. When it uses this phrase, it wants me to have my answer with pi. And for these ones, it's important to remember that chart from 5.2 day 1 that I told you to remember for the quiz. If you haven't remembered it already, go ahead and remember it for the test. That will be on Tuesday. So I'll write this over here for now. Like I said, you should have it memorized by Tuesday. Okay. Then I will also want to remember this one is from 5.3 day 1. When we were doing quadrantal angles, so angles that landed on the quadrants. So remember on this circle, this is 0 radians, this is pi-halves, this is pi, and then for our purposes today, this is normally 3 pi-halves, but I'm going to mark this as -pi-halves just because of my range for these different graphs. And then for my different angles, sine is always y over r, cosine is always x over r, tangent is always y over x. Y over x, why did I write r? And r will always be 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I want to look for where the value of sine gives me 1/2. So using either the chart I wrote in red or the graph I wrote in green, where does sine equal 1/2? Pi over 6. Notice this isn't positive 1/2, it's negative 1/2, right? And the reason this works is if I think of just sine, I'm restricted by my range between negative pi halves and pi halves. So, between these two spots. And my angle either has to be positive in the first quadrant and sine is negative in the fourth quadrant. So when I write my angles for these answers, for arc sine and inverse sine, they will either be positive or negative the angle, and they match the sign of the ratio for sine. So questions on number 1, that's all I need to do. That is my answer. So this question is just asking me to go backwards and find which angle will give me negative 1/2. Negative pi over 6. You don't have to do this, no, I was just showing you why it works. Okay, so number 2. Where do I find square root of 3 over 2 on the chart? Or on the green? Pi over 3. And is this one positive or negative? Is there a negative in front of that fraction? The negative just goes with the exponent. So that's just telling me I'm looking for an angle. So this one is just pi thirds. I didn't lie. Okay. So on number 3, where can I find 2 in either the red chart or the green graph? There's 2? Just 2? No. Okay, do you see 2 any of those numbers I wrote on the green graph? No. Close. Remember my domain was negative 1 to 1? Is 2 in between those numbers? No, so I just write not in domain. Okay, so same ideas for cosine and tangent, but cosine works a little bit differently. Cosine has a range of 0 to pi. So whenever I need to find something and cosine has a negative angle, I actually don't want to leave my answer as negative. So if the inverse of cosine or arc cosine is negative, then we want to use pi minus our angle to find the angle measure. Actually, I want this one to be an x. So what I would do is I would take whatever my angle measure is and subtract it from pi. And that only happens when cosine is negative. Otherwise, if it's tangent or sine that's negative, I just keep the negative with the angle. Okay. So number 7, where is cosine square root of 2 over 2? And it's positive, so I don't need to worry about that. Cosine of negative 1. No, it's in the domain. So I want to use this green one. I'm looking for my x value to be negative 1, so that's pi. I know you said it. I was in the middle of explaining it. I couldn't stop my sentence. Okay? And number 10. I'm looking for tangent to be 0. Remember, when I think about tangent, it matches the same quadrants as sine for my range. So, it's not on the chart for 0. Where would I get 0 using y divided by x? Not negative pi halves. Not pi halves either. It's 0.
Oh, why can, so there's 2 zeros.
Mm-hmm.
How do you decide what is 0?
Because this one's not in tangent's range. Because tangent's between negative pi and pi.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, questions here. Okay, so my last 3 is telling me I can use a calculator to approximate. I want to make sure I'm in radians again. And then my first question wants me to do arctan. But notice, if I look at my keys, none of these things say arctan, but this one says tangent inverse. So if I press second and then the tangent button, it means the same thing. And then I'm going to type in the negative 8.45. Which gets me this. It wants me to round to the nearest 10,000th. How many decimal places is that? So my answer for number 13 is going to be negative 1.4530. And that's it. I'm done with number 13. Okay. So type in number 14 and let me know what you guys get. .2472. Okay, and then number 15? No. So, yeah, not in domain. Because the calculator should be giving you an error here. So, questions on 13 through 15. Yeah, both those things mean the same thing.